The Founder of Demonic Cultivation. An English translation by Fan EE 33. Read by Luna Minerva. Chapter 23. Malice, Part 2. Jiang Cheng spoke again. "Let me borrow your dog." Jin Ling recovered from his dazed stupor and hesitated briefly, but Jiang Cheng's gaze of cold lightning swept toward him. The boy whistled, and the black-maned spirit dog bounded over in 3 strides. Wei Wuxian's entire body turned as stiff as a slab of iron. He could only allow himself to be dragged by the hand and trudge step by step forward. Jiang Cheng found an empty room and threw Wei Wuxian inside. The spirit dog followed them into the room and sat at the entrance, and Jiang Cheng closed the door behind them. Wei Wuxian's eyes were fixed on the dog, in case it abruptly rushed toward him, and he reflected on how quickly he had been subjugated. Jiang Cheng knows how to manipulate me as well as he knows the back of his hand. The man in question slowly lowered himself to the seat by the table and poured himself a cup of tea. For a long time, neither spoke, and all was silent. The cup was steaming. Before he had taken a single sip, Jiang Cheng suddenly hurled it at the floor. He lifted the corner of his lip slightly and spoke. You don't have anything to say to me?" When he was young, Jiang Cheng saw Wei Wuxian flee from dogs in a wild panic a countless number of times. The yearling Lao Zu could hide himself from others, but to someone who knew him from bottom to top, he had no counter-argument. This was a far more difficult problem than Zidian's body-snatching test. "I don't know what to say to you," Wei Wuxian replied sincerely. "So you refuse to repent," Jiang Cheng said in a low voice. In their past conversations, they had frequently tried to sarcastically undermine each other. Wei Wuxian thus replied without thinking. "Similarly, you haven't improved a single ounce either." Jiang Cheng's answering smile was brimming with fury. "Fine. Then let's see which of us truly hasn't shown an ounce of improvement." He sat motionless by the table and let out a shout. The spirit dog immediately stood up. Wei Wuxian's entire body had already become covered in a layer of cold sweat from sharing a room with the animal. He eyed the dog, who was more than half a man's height, with fangs protruding from its mouth. His ears filled with the dog's low growl, and every part of him, from his toes to the top of his head, went numb. His memory of his period of childhood homelessness was blurry, but if he remembered anything, it was the panicked terror of being chased down the street and the unbearable agony of sharp teeth and claws digging into his flesh. The fear ran deep in his heart, buried inside like thick roots in soil. No matter how much he tried, he could not soothe or overcome it. Suddenly, Jiang Cheng looked at him askance. "Who are you shouting for?" All the parts of Wei Wuxian's soul were in complete and utter disarray. He couldn't recall whether he had called out anyone's name at all, and only after Jiang Cheng called off the dog was he able to force his spirit to settle back down inside its mortal shell. Momentarily dazed, he jerked his head violently away. Jiang Cheng had already left his seat. A horsewhip was attached crookedly to his waist, and he placed his hand upon it, leaned over, and examined Wei Wuxian's face. A moment later he straightened himself and said, "Now that you mention it, I forgot to ask. Since when did you have such a good relationship with Lan Wangji?" Immediately, Wei Wuxian realized whose name he had unintentionally blurted out. Jiang Cheng smiled darkly. "The degree to which he protected you on Dafan Mountain last time sure makes a person curious." He quickly modified his words. "No, the person Lan Wangji was protecting may not have been you. After all, the Gusu Lan clan wouldn't forget what you and your loyal dog did. How could someone everyone lauds as solemnly righteous like him possibly tolerate you? He may have had some intimate relations with the body you stole instead." His speech coursed with hot poison. Every sentence was backhanded praise. Wei Wuxian couldn't bear to listen to it any longer. "Watch what you say." "I never do that, don't you remember?" "True," Wei Wuxian said, mockingly. Jiang Cheng harumphed. "Don't you feel embarrassed asking me to watch my words? Don't you remember? Did you watch your words when you spoke to Jin Ling on Dafan Mountain?" Wei Wuxian immediately stiffened. Having regained the upper hand, Jiang Cheng's expression grew cheerful again, and he smiled coldly. "Your mother may have had you, but she sure didn't raise you. You did a great job rebuking him, aren't you clever? Every time someone says things like that behind Jin Ling's back, it's thanks to you. You're quite the forgetful old man, but I suppose eminent personages such as yourself always have a short memory. You may have forgotten your own words and promises, but don't forget how his mother and father died." Wei Wuxian jerked his head up violently. "I didn't forget, I only—" No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find the words to continue. "I only what? Cat got your tongue? No matter. You can come back to Lotus Pier with me, kneel in front of my mother and father's souls, and say it slowly." Wei Wuxian forced his thoughts to calm down and make a quick turn towards searching for some method of escape. Though he dreamt of returning to Lotus Pier even as he slept, he hardly wanted to go back to the unrecognizable Lotus Pier of today. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps ran toward them, and a hand slammed repeatedly against the door. "Uncle!" Jin Ling shouted from outside. "Didn't I tell you to stay still?" Jiang Cheng said, raising his voice. "Why did you come over here?" "Uncle, I have something very important to tell you," Jin Ling said. "How important could it be when you've held your tongue for so long? Why do you have to tell me now instead of when I was scolding you?" "The reason I didn't say anything earlier was because you were yelling at me the whole time," Jin Ling replied angrily. "Are you going to listen or not? If you don't listen, then I won't tell you." Jiang Cheng's whole face was a pit of flames as he threw open the door. "Say it quickly, then get out!" As soon as the wooden door opened, Jin Ling placed his foot inside. He had changed back into a new white clan uniform. "I actually did come across a problem today. I think I ran into Wen Ning." Jiang Cheng's brow twitched and his hand immediately went to his sword. His expression was deadly serious. "When? Where?" "Just this afternoon," Jin Ling answered. "There's a rundown house about a couple dozen miles or so to the south. I only went there because I heard that there was something strange going on. Who could have predicted that a fierce corpse would be hiding inside?" Jin Ling put on a very earnest performance, but to Wei Wuxian's ears, every word was utter nonsense. He couldn't have had a clearer picture of Jin Ling's true whereabouts this afternoon. Moreover, once when Ning went into hiding, a junior cultivator would hardly find him so easily without Wei Wuxian deliberately summoning him. "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" Jiang Cheng said. "Well, I couldn't be sure it was him. The fierce corpse was too fast. As soon as I entered, he fled. I only had a blurry glimpse of him from behind, but I heard the iron chains from when we met him on Dafan Mountain. That's the only way I could have guessed it was him. If you weren't yelling at me so loudly my head was about to split open, I would have told you immediately when I came back. If he ran away and you can't catch him, you should blame your own bad temper, not me." Jin Ling wanted to poke his head into the room, but Jiang Cheng was so furious that he slammed the door shut right in his nephew's face. Through it, he said, "I'll come back to settle the score with you later. Scram! Now!" Jin Ling made a noise that sounded like, "Oh," and his footsteps faded into the distance. Upon seeing Jiang Cheng turn back around, Wei Wuxian hurriedly concocted an expression that was part going pale with surprise, part "my secret has been revealed," and part "whatever shall I do now that Wen Ning has been discovered?" Jin Ling had actually been quite smart, and he had exploited the fact that Jiang Cheng absolutely despised Wen Ning to lie to his uncle smoothly. Jiang Cheng was ever aware that the Yiling Laozu and the Ghost General usually worked together to wreak havoc, and thus had already suspected Wen Ning's presence nearby. He already mostly believed what Jin Ling said, and now that Wei Wuxian's expression seemed to corroborate it, his belief increased further. Moreover, Whenever he heard Wen Ning's name, the flames of his anger leapt thousands of meters skywards, and his head filled with hot fury. There was no room in his thoughts for suspicion. Malicious fumes filling the pit of his stomach to the point of bursting, he lifted and brandished his whip. He cracked it against the floor right beside Wei Wuxian and spoke with a voice full of loathing. "You really do take that obedient dog everywhere you go." "He's been dead for a long time and I've already died once. What more do you want?" Wei Wuxian replied. Pointing his whip at him, Jiang Cheng said, "What more do I want? If he died 1,000 or 10,000 deaths, it would still hardly be enough to extinguish my hatred. Others didn't manage to eliminate him back then. Great! Today I'll go eliminate him myself. I'll find him and throw him into a fire right now, then scatter his ashes to the wind right in front of your face." He slammed the door shut behind him, left for the main hall and gave instructions to Jin Ling. "Watch the person inside the room for me. Don't believe anything he says. Don't even listen to it. And don't let a single sound come out of his mouth. If he dares to whistle or play the flute, gag him. If you can't gag him, then just chop off his hand and cut out his tongue." Wei Wuxian knew that Jiang Cheng's words were deliberately directed toward him. They were threats against stirring up trouble. Caution dictated that Jiang Cheng couldn't bring him along, as he might use the opportunity to take control of Wen Ning. Jin Ling's reply was entirely apathetic. "I know already. Don't you think I can't keep watch over a single person? Uncle, what were you doing shut in the room with that gay bastard? What did he do now?" "Don't ask such things," Jiang Cheng said. "Remember to watch him well. If he disappears, I'm gonna break your legs." After asking Jin Ling for more detailed directions, he went off to pursue the non-existent Wen Ning, taking half of his people with him. A while passed before Wei Wuxian heard Jin Ling's haughty voice through the door. "You go over there. You stand watch nearby. You guys are stationed at the main entrance. I'll go inside and check on him." None of the disciples had the nerve to object, and rightly so. In a flash, the door to the room opened, and Jin Ling stuck his head inside, his eyes darting everywhere. The boy pressed a finger over his lips as Wei Wuxian sat up, then lightly stepped inside. He placed his hand on Zidian and uttered a few words in a low voice. Zidian recognized its masters, and Jiang Cheng had probably made it recognize Jin Ling. In the blink of an eye, the electric current disappeared, and the weapon became a silver ring set with amethyst, falling into Jin Ling's snow-white palm. Jin Ling spoke quietly. "Let's go." The Yunmong Jiang clan disciples had been thrown into complete disarray by Jin Ling's orders. The boy and Wei Wuxian made their escape through the window and over the wall, tiptoeing quietly away. After exiting the inn, they ran wildly but silently into a nearby forest. It was then that Wei Wuxian heard a strange sound behind him. He turned his head to take a look and suffered an organ-splitting fright. "Why is it following us? Make it go away!" Jin Ling blew 2 short whistles. The panting dog's tongue lolled out of its mouth, and it let out a quiet whimper, pointy ears twitching. Then it hung its head, looking disheartened, before it turned and ran off. "You're really hopeless," Jin Ling said, full of contempt. "Xianzi never bites people. It only looks ferocious, that's all. My spirit dog's been strictly trained. It only attacks evil spirits. Do you think it's an ordinary dog?" "Wait a second," Wei Wuxian said. "What did you call it?" "Xianzi. That's his name." "You gave a dog a name like that?" Jin Ling spoke with righteous indignation. "What's wrong with it? When it was a puppy, it was called Little Xianzi. But now that it's grown up, I can't keep calling it that." Wei Wuxian refused to accept this explanation. No. The problem has nothing to do with whether the dog is big or small. Where did you learn how to name things?" Of course, there was no need to say it. The answer could only be his uncle. A long time ago, Jiang Cheng had also kept several puppies, which he had named things like Mo Li, Fei Fei, and Xiao Ai. Names that sounded like they belonged to a brothel star attraction. "A real man doesn't care about these petty things. Why are you nagging me about this?" "Fine, stop. You offended my uncle, which means you are basically a dead man walking. I set you free, so now we're even." "Do you know why your uncle captured me?" Wei Wuxian asked. Of course I know. He suspects you're Wei Wuxian. This time it's not just a suspicion. He caught the right person, Wei Wuxian thought before continuing. And what about you? You don't suspect me too. It's not like this is the first time my uncle's done something like this. He always prefers the prospect of catching the wrong person to the prospect of letting anyone go. But since Zidian didn't expel your soul from your body, I'll believe that you're not him, for now. Anyway, that Wei lowlife wasn't gay, but you'd go so far as to harass. He had yet to say who Wei Wuxian had harassed before a cold, disgusted expression crossed his face, and his words came to a halt. He fanned himself with his hand, as though to ward away pestilence. Ugh. One way or another, from this point onwards, you have nothing to do with the Lanling Jin clan. If you're going to be sick, don't come looking for us, or else I'll never forgive you. Once he was done, Jin Ling turned around and began walking off. After a few steps, he looked backward and said, Why are you just standing there? Are you just gonna wait for my uncle to come and get you? Let me tell you, don't think that just because you rescued me, I'll have some kind of deep gratitude toward you. Especially don't hang your hopes on me telling you some mushy nonsense. Defeated, Wei Wuxian strolled up. You're young. In your lifetime, there are 2 pieces of mushy nonsense you will always have to utter sooner or later. What are they? Jin Ling asked. Thank you, and I'm sorry. Jin Ling scoffed. I just won't say them. What can anyone do about it? There will eventually be a day when you'll say them with tears in your eyes, Wei Wuxian said. Jin Ling made a derisive noise. Suddenly, Wei Wuxian said, I'm sorry. The boy stared blankly. What? On Dafan Mountain, what I said to you. I'm sorry. It hadn't been the first time someone had jeered at Jin Ling for lacking a mother to raise him, but no one had ever apologized to him with such seriousness. He didn't know exactly what the feeling was, but being slapped in the face with such an apology made his entire body prickle with unease. He waved his hand wildly for a while, then grumbled, It's no big deal. You're not the first person to say those things to me. That's right, I don't have a mother to raise me, but I won't be worse than anyone else because of it. In fact, you all should open your eyes and see things clearly. I'm much stronger than all of you. Wei Wuxian smiled slightly and was about to reply when suddenly he turned pale and looked stunned. Jiang Cheng, you... Having stolen Zidian and released Jiang Cheng's prisoner, Jin Ling was already in possession of a guilty conscience. Upon hearing his uncle's name, he whirled around to look for him. Availing himself of the opportunity, Wei Wuxian struck the boy on the neck with the side of his hand. He then laid Jin Ling flat on the ground, lifted his trouser leg and checked on the curse mark. Though he tried several methods to make it recede, all were met with failure. Acknowledging the intractability of the problem, he let out a long sigh. However, though there were some curse marks he couldn't get rid of, he could still transfer them onto his own body. Jin Ling began slowly waking only after some time had passed. He rubbed his neck where pain still lingered. Angrily, he leapt onto his feet and pulled out his sword on the spot. How dare you hit me? Even my uncle's never hit me! Surprised, Wei Wuxian said, Really? But doesn't he say he's gonna break your legs all the time? He's just saying that! Jin Ling raged. You gay bastard! What were you trying to do? Arms covering his head, Wei Wuxian shouted towards somewhere behind Jin Ling's back. Ah! Lan Wangji! Jin Ling feared Lan Wangji more than his uncle. After all, Jiang Cheng was family, but Han Guangjun wasn't. More than a little scared, he turned tail and fled, shouting as he ran. You gay piece of shit! You wretched lunatic! I'll remember this! This isn't over! Behind him, Wei Wuxian laughed so hard he could barely breathe. Once all signs of Jin Ling had disappeared, his diaphragm grew sore and itchy, and he broke into a coughing fit. He slowly forced himself to stop snickering. Only then did he have the space to contemplate a few things. Wei Wuxian had been 9 years old when Jiang Fengmian had taken him in. Some of his memories from that time were foggy, but Jin Ling's mother, Jiang Yanli, had remembered them clearly and had recounted several of them back to him. She had said that once father heard both of Wei Wuxian's parents had passed away in battle, he had searched endlessly for his old friend's next of kin. After searching for a long time, he finally found the child in the yearling area. The first time Jiang Fangmian saw him, he was kneeling on the ground, picking up fruit peels someone had discarded and eating them. Yearling's winters and springs were very cold, but this child was wearing only a single layer of thin trousers, whose fabric had been worn to rags around the knees. His feet sported a pair of mismatched and ill-fitting shoes. The boy's head was lowered in search of more fruit peels, but when Jiang Fangmian called him, he remembered that his name contained the word Ying, and lifted it up. The motion revealed a face that had been frozen until its cheeks were red and its skin was cracked, but still, the face was smiling. Jiang Yanli had said he'd been born with a smiling face and mirthful features. No matter what he suffered through, he didn't allow his heart to be burdened by it. No matter what kind of circumstances he found himself in, he was still happy. It almost made him sound a bit brainless and heartless, but in fact it was a very good thing. Jiang Fangmian fed him a piece of melon, and so he let the man take him home with him. At the time, Jiang Cheng was also only around 8 or 9 and had been keeping a few puppies to play with at Lotus Pier. When Jiang Fangmian discovered that Wei Wuxian was terrified of dogs, he quietly told Jiang Cheng to send his puppies away. Extremely unhappy with this, Jiang Cheng threw a tantrum. The boy bawled and hurled things everywhere, his face contorted in misery. Only after he had made a huge scene did he finally send his dogs away. Because of this, Jiang Cheng held a grudge against Wei Wuxian and treated him with hostility for a long time, but eventually the two had played together long enough to grow close. From that point onward, they made trouble everywhere together, and if they encountered a dog, Jiang Cheng would always chase it away for him, then enjoy a peal of derisive, unbridled laughter at Wei Wuxian's expense beneath whichever tree the boy had leapt atop. Wei Wuxian had always thought that Jiang Cheng would stand by his side, and that Lan Wangji would stand opposed to him. He had never had an inkling that reality would completely upend his expectations. Slowly, Wei Wuxian strolled to the rendezvous point he and Lan Wangji had agreed on. The flickerings of lantern lights were already few and far between, and he encountered not a single soul on his night journey. When he arrived, there was no need to look around. That white-robed figure stood right at the end of the long street, head ever so slightly lowered, completely motionless. Wei Wuxian had yet to make a single noise of greeting when Lan Wangji lifted his head and saw him. The man stood opposite him for a short while before calmly walking toward him. Without knowing why, Wei Wuxian involuntarily retreated a step. He thought he saw a thin web of crimson blood vessels in Lan Wangji's eyes. He had to admit it. The man's face truly was a bit frightening.